Hello everyone, welcome back, and today I'm going to be painting this monochrome panda. So obviously monochrome means single colour, and the colour is Payne's Grey. This one is by Holbein. Also got a couple of brushes, number 8 round and a rigger brush number 2 or 3, both synthetic. Here's my little sketch. I scribbled in the areas that I want to be dark and left the lighter areas obviously unscribbled, so they're the white bits. Just as a reminder, I'm just refreshing the paints, give it a spritz, and then I squirt some fresh in as well. So now I've got an empty well which I cleaned out. I'm putting in some paint from the palette, watering it down slightly. And this is a little demonstration of the different values that we can achieve with just the one colour. So the more water you put in, the paler the colour. And here's the undiluted colour straight from the tube. It's quite thick, it's quite hard to get onto the paper. Yeah, let's get on with the painting. We'll talk about the values as we go along. I'm starting off with the white areas, bits that are not scribbled in. That's why I did that, give me a guide as to where to go. And I am wetting the white area. There's a tiny hint of the grain there, as you can see, that's fine. And then I've picked up a light value from my palette, and I'm dropping it wet into wet. So it's theoretically clean water on the paper, and then a light value, and then a medium value. Now you need to be looking at your reference as you do this, so you know where you want it light or white, where you want it slightly darker, where you want it even darker still, and so on. So effectively you need to identify 3 different areas: the white areas, the light areas, and the medium areas. And then later on we'll come back and do the dark areas. And I'm painting them wet in wet so that there isn't a hard edge between those different areas. They blend together. Now here I've decided I've gone a little bit too dark in this area. The value is too dark, and I've got my brush which I've cleaned off, and it's damp, and I am using it to lift out the paint, especially here on the chin, or the muzzle, I suppose that is. So it's a damp brush, and if you touch a damp brush onto wet paper, it will suck some of that paint up. So you can use your damp brush to remove paint. So now I'm going on to the other side of the face, and again I'm pre-wetting the areas that I want to be painted onto with some clean-ish water. And then I've got my light value, I'm dropping it in. That's more of a mid value. So you get the idea of pre-wetting and then dropping in a value. So when I'm talking about value, if you've never heard the term value before, value basically means how light or how dark a colour is. And there's lots of different ways you can measure this. There are actual value scales. I think it goes from 0 to 9 or 1 to 9. But I just generally break it down into, I want a white area, which is no value at all. It's unpainted. I want a light value, and then I want a middle value, and then a dark value. And you can split that down even further, so you've got a dark light, a light dark, etc. But basically, if you have 3 or 4 in mind, 3 or 4 values in mind, you won't go wrong. But it is important to realise that when you make a painting, it's all about the value rather than the colour. If you get the values right, it doesn't really matter what the colours are. If you get the colours right, but the values are wrong, you'll end up with a very insipid painting. So now I've gone to the dark colour. So this is almost undiluted paint. There's very little water in it. And I'm painting right up against the light area, and obviously they're going to run into each other. And that's what I want. I like that effect. If you don't want that effect, then you need to make sure that your painting is dry before you add these dark areas. The thing about adding it when it's dry is you could get some hard edges. So you can see along the top of the ear, it's quite hard. So I'm just softening it a little bit with clean water. And the same on this here. Next, I move into one of the dark areas on the body, and this is a dark value. So this is nearly all paint and very little water. As much paint as I can get on with as little water as I can to just make it move on the paper. I want a nice dark, very dark area under the head to separate the head from the body so that the head will stand out. And you can see that I'm almost dry brushing here. The paint there's so little water in it. I'm actually dry brushing that little bit there at the bottom. Okay, let's get that dark under here. And the reason we want it really dark here is because we want the contrast with the chin. So we'll really get the definition of the face against the body. If we had two medium values there, they would just blend into each other as they do on the face, and we wouldn't get the impact. So we're manipulating the values so that we've got light and dark against each other in the areas where we want the most contrast. Obviously subject to the colours of the subject that you're painting. So obviously we have to put dark areas around the eyes and dark areas on the ears, etc. And again, at this point, the paint is very thick, very little water, and it's almost dry brush on. And notice that I'm using the side of the brush as well as the tip of the brush. So yeah, it's practically a dry brush at this point. Obviously a very thick dry brush. There's not much in the way of a broken line there. So I continue to add the different values in the different areas as shown on my reference to block in all the main colours, and then we'll come on to the details in a moment. So you saw me there practicing on a scrap of paper for the eye, and it's basically a white circle inside a black circle. It's not a circle, it's an eye shape. But basically you need to leave a white area at the top to act as the catch light. And the way I do that is to draw with the brush a little circle on the top and then fill the rest in edges. So okay, and then on to the nose. Quite a dark value here. And I'm using my rigger brush for all these details. Now, if you don't have a rigger brush, it's basically a very fine brush. So you can use a small brush that you have. The advantage of the rigger brush is that it's very long bristles, and it holds a lot of water. So you can paint a lot without having to keep reloading. If you had a very small bristle brush, you'd paint an eye, then you'd have to reload the paint. So you'd paint the nose and you'd have to reload, you'd paint the line and you'd have to reload, etc. So the rigger allows you to paint in a more constant, more prolonged manner. And there on the mouth, I dampened the brush and lifted off some of the black that I just put on to give myself a lip. I'm sticking with the rigger, even though it's not strictly necessary. I could go back to the other one now, but I'm sticking with the rigger to put a medium value into the eye patch, the dark area around the eye. It's obviously darker than that, and as I do a lot, I start off with a wet area and then drop in on top of that to give me a nice soft transition and a little bit of variation. So this won't be a solid black area when it dries. You get some little variation of the mid value showing through the black. And then repeat that process for the other eye. So a mid value for the black eye patch, followed by dropping in the dark value, wet into wet, let them blend together, and you will get some variation rather than a solid black mass. Now it's dry on the nose. I've got my damp rigger and I'm lifting out a little highlight on the top of the nose and scratching it into the top of the muzzle. And I'm repeating that colour here on the eye line. So this is going to give the illusion of the muzzle. However, I thought that was a little bit nasty looking, so I decided to rub some of it out and accidentally rubbed out the eye. These things happen, so in order to correct that, first of all I need to dry the eye thoroughly. I can't paint onto wet, can't paint fine details like the eye onto a wet area, so I blotted out everything, made it completely dry, and go again. Now, the second eye wasn't quite as good, I didn't think, as the first eye, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because it's kind of turning to the left a little bit, so you want one eye to be more prominent than the other to reinforce that feeling of it looking off to the side. So, yeah, mid-tone and dark, and as you can see, because it's still a bit wet though, it looks worse than it is in the end. So I'm looking at my reference and I'm trying to make sure that I get some white on the muzzle, white on the forehead, and then medium tones around the juncture of the muzzle and the head, and then darker tones under the muzzle and under the cheeks. Basically, you just need to follow your reference, identify the values of your reference to be able to almost sculpt out a shape, and then some fine lines along the pencil line of the outline. Some dark there. Just dotting it on to give some kind of impression of little hairs, little bristles. And then the darkest value of all for the nostril. And then tidy up. I'm just tidying up the nose and the mouth. Gently does it. Put a light value under the chin, because obviously there'll be a little bit of shadow under the chin. And then a little cast shadow, it's the shadow of his ear on his head. So it's a kind of a medium value. So remember, this is all one colour, this is all Payne's grey, and The reason I did this was because you don't then have to worry about mixing different colours and choosing different colours. I've just lifted out a slight highlight above the eye there, and that really gets that eye popping out of the dark patch. So a couple of extra lines on his back and we're almost done. One or two of those are too heavy in hindsight. But that's the finished painting. I came back to the next day, or a couple of hours later rather, and decided that I wanted that this area here on the arm was too dark. And so you can lighten it. It's completely dry. I've got a wet or a damp brush and then a tissue. So apply some damp paint on and then rub it over the tissue. And there we go. We've altered the value from a very dark to a lighter dark. And I continue to do that wherever I think I need to. So even when your painting's finished, and you can go back in and make alterations just by using a damp brush to blot it out, scratch it out with your tissue. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. That was a little exercise in values, and next week I'm going to come back and paint the second panda, so I hope you're going to join me for that. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.